Hey everyone, it's JVD here from the Villains of Mhan, bringing you another comic book review over The Flash, issues 28 through 32, titled Negative for the trade paperback under Volume 5 under the Rebirth Banner. This has 3 stories in it. 2 of them are 2 issues apiece, the last one being a one-shot. Issues 28 through 29 are titled Negative, which the trade paperback is under. Issues 30 to 31 is called Bloodwork and reveal a new villain for The Flash. And issue 32 is Welcome to Iron Heights, a one-shot that kind of doesn't lead to anything special. Now, I was kind of really excited to read this based off the last story arc that is running scared, where Flash is thrown into the negative speed force by Reverse Flash and winds up gaining its powers and winds up having to learn how to use them in this story. And I really thought maybe you would go a little in depth, or even it would explain more of how Barry came to get the powers by being trapped in the negative speed force. And it's kind of lackluster on how that even happens. But it's interesting seeing how he's reacting with these negative speed force powers. Has a kind of intertwine with his speed force powers. And you also realize that this whole thing is taking a toll on his life. They're continuing to theme as Barry Allen's life as being the Flash is taking a toll on his normal life, and now where it's kind of mainly focused on Yellow Wally, Kid Flash, and his relationship with Iris West. Through this story, it's really affecting his job as the CSI for Central City Police Department. Also, he's kind of learning how to function as a normal person doing all this based on the way the negative speed force reacts to his body, his physical well-being. And at the end of this, he winds up losing his job at the crime lab and getting transferred to Iron Heights. And that's where the story Welcome to Iron Heights kind of takes place into. But overall, this isn't nothing special. Even though we do get a new villain called Bloodwork, there's nothing really special due to his powers. There's no explaining how he's a coroner for Central City Police Department named Ramsey Rosso, and you really don't get a good explanation of how he's developed his powers, and it's just all kind of science-based. It's very slow. It's not exciting. There's nothing there. But overall, you could probably skip the story if you're a fan of The Flash. There's not a lot to read here. Based on the last issues, like I said, I was really hoping they would go in depth of how he got the Speed Force powers. And like I had said, based on that the Running Scared story where he was helping out Hal Jordan, Green Lantern, he talked about how every second and the Speed Force was like a day to him, and I was hoping that in the negative Speed Force it would kind of be the same way while he was trapped there, and it's not really like that. Now, as I go into some spoiler territory here for this whole story, that's the whole problem here, is he just kind of absorbed it while he was there, so they kind of give you the impression that Zoom put him there, and he coming out as quick as he did, he was just there for mere moments, and he absorbed the negative speed force there. And I'm hoping maybe he was more like a conductor for it, and maybe as this develops out, you'll learn more about that. But no, they just basically kind of tell you he absorbed him while he was there. It's very simple. But as the story goes on and he's chasing down the Road Reapers, you're learning that the negative speed force to him is destructive, and you get to see all this destruction he's caused as he's chasing them down and whatnot. And it's really kind of neat that the negative speed force is also reacting to what's going on around him. Like the Road Reapers are shooting bullets at him, and the negative speed force is jumping out and destroying them before he can even have a chance to phase through and react to the bullet. So it's almost protecting him in a sense, almost like the Venom symbiote or any of the symbiotes do in Marvel, and we'll get to more of that later once we start talking about Bloodwork. But basically, this is all kind of taking their toll on him and whatnot. And you learn that, unlike the Speed Force, he's not healing like he normally would. It's the negative speed force is exhausting him, and there's a scene where you see him after his fight with Shrapnel, who you learn that he's got a destructive aura that could take so much punishment and explode. It winds up blowing up Shrapnel, who is usually known for putting himself back together and can't due to this. There's a scene where he gets in a bathtub full of ice because he is so beat up and his suit is shredded from fighting Shrapnel, and he talks about how maybe he needs to contact Batman and learn how he deals with this. And he says, oh, why? He's got a butler named Alfred. So, kind of a joke about how Batman's always, patching himself up even though he's basically a vanilla human. But as the story goes on, this has affected his life so much that, he's the whole being late for work always as Barry Allen has played into effect. And you learn that Director Singh has found out that someone is stealing evidence from the Central City Police Department files and whatnot. So him, Kristen Kramer, who is also a member of the CSI there, and Burns and Amaro, some detectives that work for Central City, are tasked with finding out who's stealing this evidence. We'll come to find out. And it's Ramsey Rosso, who starts calling himself Bloodwork. And when you learn this in the negative story, once the Bloodwork two-part story starts, you instantly can identify that it's him. He's the guy that's doing it. Because when they meet him and they're trying to... Kristen Kramer's going to steal some evidence while Barry's talking to him. It's very obvious once the next issue starts and you actually see this monster that is Bloodwork on the cover that he actually has to be the person doing it. So it's very obvious once you start reading that. But anyways, to get into a little about Bloodwork, this new villain we've got here, he is basically hemophobic, where, his blood doesn't clot, and he's trying to find a way to basically stop him and make him normal, and he's basically experimenting on all the blood work that's in the evidence lab and his own blood work. And basically, when the Flash finds out that it's him, he blasts him with the negative speed force lightning, and it doesn't hurt him, so he's almost invulnerable. But eventually, the angrier he gets, he becomes more feral, and at first he's human looking when he transforms during his fight with him and Barry. And much like how I had mentioned the tendril, how the negative speed force was a symbiote, kind of like Venom, and it reacts off of Barry's negative emotions, much does like Bloodwork and his powers. They react when he is angrier. And at first, it almost looks like he's inside out. But his skin is just red, and his arms are ending in blue, and I do believe his feet. And he kind of looks like Toxin, the symbiote spawn of Carnage. And he's got all these massive tendrils made of, it looks like clotted blood. It's a very Akira-like as he does this. And as he gets angrier, much like he looks more feral and kind of symbiote-like. And then even in one scene in the face, he kind of looks like Clover from Cloverfield. But basically, Barry winds up hitting him almost like a defibrillator and making all the blood around him explode and turning him to normal. And he gets arrested, and you don't know if that's the end of his powers, because he doesn't get to use them anymore once he gets arrested. And even when he says that he's going to be innocent because there's no evidence, and Christian Kramer finds out that there's evidence all over the computer, he doesn't try to lash out or anything. So I would imagine that with the negative speed force powers, Barry burned it all out of him. So a new villain is born, and automatically he's gone like that. But I would not be surprised in the new future that Black Hole gets a hold of him. But anyways, this all leads to some lies told by Christian Kramer to kind of cover Barry Allen on the case, and they wind up getting transferred to Iron Heights, where they meet Wolf, and you get to see him, how he lets Iron Heights be ran, and there's a fight going down in the cafeteria between Detective August Hart, who is Godspeed, and Heatwave, who have been captured from the Rogues Reloaded. And August Hart is kind of taken off guard as he sees Barry, and I've kind of been waiting for a moment like this, and eventually them two are going to wind up teaming up. It's bound to happen. And and then one thing that hit me during all this is I was like, why are all the rogues here dressed up? Like every villain is in their costume. And Kristen Kramer asked Wolf that, and he says, well, it's basically to remind them of their past. So at least they explained that real fast, because I was kind of interested in that. But what got me thinking that they were wearing it is because Captain Cold basically was going to be the crime boss, and he was talking about this when they were imprisoned at the end of Rogues Reloaded, and Shrapnel kept saying there was a new crime boss in town, so I'm assuming he was working for Captain Cold, and even he is seen in this fight between Godspeed and Heatwave while they're in Iron Heights. And then as the story goes on, Copperhead's there, and there's two guys that were working with a guy named Black Spider that got busted up by Wally, Yellow Wally, and Flash because they've kind of made up. And she knows there's someone else treading on her territory. Well, it's got to be Captain Cold. It has to be. He's already kind of started this behind the scene in Iron Heights, which you've kind of learned a little in this book, like I said, with Shrapnel. But anyways, by the end of this, Wally and Barry have kind of come to an understanding as Flash and Kid Flash. So Barry gives his ring to Yellow Wally, says he's not worthy of it, and wants him to hold on to it. And then, but you realize that now Barry's learning as they're teaming up again that his negative speed force powers are almost being controlled by the speed force of Yellow Wally. So as long as they're running around, he's not having to be out of control. It's almost containing the destructive aura that he's gathered, being with the negative speed force. And it doesn't seem to take a wear and tear on his body like you seen earlier once they split up and he goes to Iron Heights. But at the end of this, you get the real kicker as Mina shows up out of nowhere when Barry is calling Yellow Wally. And here he thought she was dead, and not too long ago we had seen that she was a member of Black Hole, and now she's here. And that's how the book ends. So I'm really curious of how all that's going to play out. I've seen in previews of one of the upcoming issues, there's a cover of them two kissing each other. And now that Iris West is kind of out of the picture, which they've kind of officially made their breakup official in this book, that now that she's back and he really cared about her because she was a speedster much like him, and they would have more in common instead of being scientists, that they were both speedsters and learning about the speed force. So I'm curious to see where all that's going to go. I'm also going to assume that she has, because she can sense speedsters, that she has to sense the negative speed force in him. Or maybe she even sensed Reverse Flash escaping and was more curious to what was going on, sensing this new type of speed force since she's a speedster now. But I'm assuming they're going to wind up trying to take the negative speed force out of him and weaponize it. It would make a lot of sense. We also seen in the last Ordering Scared War, they had got multiplex. Black Hole did when they were taken into Iron Heights. And like I had said, I'm pretty sure they're going to wind up getting this Bloodwork guy and doing something with him. Because you could see where, well, he was stealing, and that's part of his power. He can basically control the blood in you. And when he was trying to take it from Barry, he was pulling the negative speed force out of him. And I think that might be one of the reasons he was Golden Feral. Like I said, they really didn't do a really good job of explaining how he became impervious and that you couldn't injure him due to his hemophilia and how he is working on himself. So maybe more of this will be explained to later. Like I said, in the end, this is all going to wind up tying back into Black Hole. They're slowly taking these villains, and now that Mina is part of the Speed Force, she's a speedster, she really can understand how the Speed Force works, even though they're turning it into weapons. So I'm really curious how that's going to turn out. But like I said, as a fan of Flash, I really could have done without this whole story. Like I said, you really didn't get a lot of Barry diving deep into these negative Speed Force powers. Even though you learned how they're affecting him, like the destructive aura, how it's destroying everything around him, how it was nipping at the bullets, much like a symbiote, and how basically the destructive aura taking so much damage would cause Barry to explode, and how he took out shrapnel. And then how it reacts with the Speed Force from other speedsters. So I'm curious how that's going to act with Mina now that he's met her. And even if he winds up meeting Red Wally or Jay Garrick, who's somewhere out there, I'm curious how that's all going to play out. So, not a good story. There's some background stuff in there that could be cool for the future, and I'm curious to see how that works out. But I'm JVD. This has been my review for Flash Negative from the Rebirth series. Keep reading, guys.